Arthur Sterling's world was built of glass and steel, a kingdom suspended 50 stories above the city. From his corner office, the metropolis sprawled below, a silent, intricate map of his influence. The hum of his empire was a constant whisper in the polished chrome and Italian leather, a sound that was supposed to signify power, success, and meaning. Instead, it only echoed the profound hollowness in his chest. His desk was a vast expanse of mahogany, holding only a single, framed photograph. It showed a woman with a radiant smile and a small boy with her same bright eyes, his hair a sunny halo around his face. Eleanor and Leo. One was a memory, a ghost of warmth in this cold, sterile life. The other was his entire universe. He looked at the photo, his fingers tracing the edge of the silver frame. Leo's hair was gone now, replaced by a collection of soft beanies and caps that Arthur bought in every color, a futile attempt to paint cheerfulness over a stark reality. The cancer had taken so much, but it had not taken his son's spirit. That spirit was the last flickering candle in the cavern of Arthur's heart, and he would guard it with the ferocity of a dragon. The wealth, the company, the skyline, it was all just fuel to keep that one small flame from being extinguished. The silence of the office was a heavy blanket. Years ago, this room had been filled with Eleanor's laughter. She had insisted on placing a ridiculously comfortable armchair in the corner, a splash of soft fabric in a world of hard angles. For emergency naps and creative thinking, she had said. Now it sat empty, a shrine to a life that had been stolen from him. He was a king in a glass castle, ruling over an empire of grief. Every transaction, every merger, every billion-dollar decision was a distraction from the one negotiation he could not win, the one with fate itself. He glanced at the clock. It was almost time. Time to leave this empty fortress and return to the only part of his world that mattered. Time to pick up Leo. Today was a good day. Leo's energy was up, his smile was bright, and he had a singular, shimmering wish. "Daddy, can we go to the pool? The big one? Please." How could he refuse? A few miles away, in a world stitched together from worn-out novels and the scent of chamomile tea, Clara Evans counted the coins in a jar on her kitchen counter. Her small bungalow was nestled on a quiet street, a stark contrast to the sprawling, modern mansion that loomed next door. Her home was a haven of soft light and organized clutter, every surface covered in books and Lily's crayon drawings. It was a life measured not in stock portfolios, but in overdue library notices and the cost of groceries. She was a librarian, a custodian of stories, yet she felt as though her own was stuck on a single, repeating chapter: work, pay bills, care for Lily, sleep, repeat. The wolf was always at the door, but she met its growl with a quiet dignity. She possessed a strength that was not forged in a boardroom, but in late nights spent worrying over a feverish child and early mornings facing a world that rarely offered a gentle hand. Her daughter, Lily, was a small, bright sunbeam, her laughter the only luxury Clara truly craved. She sat at the kitchen table, humming to herself as she drew a picture of two stick figures holding hands under a lopsided sun. One for her mama. Clara looked out the window at the imposing house next door. It was a fortress of solitude. She rarely saw the man who lived there, a mysterious figure who came and went in a sleek black car. She knew he had a son about Lily's age, a quiet little boy she sometimes saw through the fence, his face often pale and serious. She felt a pang of sympathy for the child, who seemed to live in a gilded cage. Today, however, the neighborhood was alive with the promise of summer. The air was thick with the smell of chlorine and freshly cut grass, carried on the breeze from the community pool just down the street. "Mama, can we go swimming?" Lily asked, her eyes wide with hope. "It's so hot." Clara looked at the coin jar, then at her daughter's expectant face. There was enough. Just enough. "Yes, sweetie," she said, her voice warmer than she felt. "Let's go swimming." The community pool was a riot of color and sound. Shouts of joy echoed off the bright blue water, and the sun beat down with a relentless, cheerful glare. Arthur felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach as he led Leo, who was clutching his hand tightly, toward the entrance. Leo wore a bright yellow cap, his thin frame draped in a towel decorated with cartoon rockets. His eyes, however, were fixed on the shimmering water, sparkling with an excitement that made Arthur's heart ache. He paid their admission, the transaction feeling mundane, normal. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe they were just a regular father and son, about to enjoy a simple summer afternoon. He found a spot on the grass, laid out their towels, and began to apply sunscreen to Leo's pale skin. He was careful, his touch gentle around the barely visible outline of the chemo port beneath a waterproof dressing on his chest. "Ready, little man?" Arthur asked, forcing a smile. "Ready, Daddy," Leo chirped, already shrugging off his towel. They had just reached the edge of the pool when a sharp voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, sir." Arthur turned. A stern-faced man in a lifeguard polo shirt stood before them, his arms crossed. Behind him, a small group of parents whispered, their eyes darting from Leo's cap to the dressing on his chest. A woman with a severe haircut and a weathered face, who Arthur recognized as the head of the neighborhood association, Mrs. Gable, watched with a look of undisguised disapproval. "Can I help you?" Arthur asked, his voice calm, level. "I'm afraid your son can't go in the water," the manager said, not meeting his eyes. The world seemed to tilt. The joyful shouts faded into a dull roar in Arthur's ears. He felt Leo's small hand go limp in his own. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's a hygiene issue," the man mumbled, gesturing vaguely at Leo. "And a liability. We can't have children with conditions in the public pool. It's against the rules." Mrs. Gable stepped forward, her voice a blade of cold steel. "It's for the safety of all the children, Mr. Sterling. We can't risk infection. Surely you understand." Arthur felt something crack inside him. He looked from their hard, unyielding faces to the face of his son. Leo's excitement had evaporated, replaced by a look of confusion and shame that shattered Arthur's soul. The boy pulled his towel tighter around himself, as if trying to hide. He was just a child. A child who wanted to swim. And they were looking at him like he was a contamination. "He has a waterproof medical dressing," Arthur said, his voice dangerously quiet. "He has his doctor's permission. He is no risk to anyone." "Rules are rules," Mrs. Gable stated, her chin held high. "Perhaps this isn't the place for him." The cruelty of her words hung in the hot, still air. Arthur knelt, ignoring them all, his entire focus on his son. "It's okay, Leo," he whispered, his voice thick with a pain he was desperately trying to conceal. "We'll do something else. Something even better." But Leo's eyes were filling with tears, a silent, heartbreaking overflow of disappointment. The whispers of the other parents felt like stones being thrown at them. Humiliation washed over Arthur, cold and bitter. He wrapped his arm around his son, shielding him, and turned to leave. Just then, a quiet but firm voice spoke up from behind them. "What you're doing is wrong." Arthur stopped. He turned to see a woman with kind, weary eyes and a determined set to her jaw. It was his neighbor, the librarian. She held the hand of a little girl who was staring at Leo with wide, curious eyes. Clara Evans stepped forward, placing herself between Arthur's family and the committee of judges. She didn't know this man's name was Sterling, or that he commanded an empire. She saw only a father trying to protect his visibly fragile son. "He's a little boy," Clara said, her voice trembling slightly but clear as a bell. "He just wants to swim. What are you so afraid of? Compassion? A little bit of human decency?" Mrs. Gable scoffed. "This doesn't concern you." "It concerns anyone who believes in being kind," Clara shot back, her gaze unwavering. She looked at Arthur then, a deep, resonant empathy in her eyes that pierced through his shock. She wasn't offering pity. It was something stronger. It was solidarity. Arthur simply nodded, a silent thank you that felt wholly inadequate. He scooped Leo into his arms and walked away from the pool, from the whispers and the stares, leaving the sound of Clara's brave, lonely defense behind him. As he walked, a cold, hard resolve began to form in the broken pieces of his heart. If the world would not make a place for his son, he would build one. That night, Arthur sat in the dark, watching the moon cast a sterile glow over his manicured, empty backyard. The memory of Leo's silent tears was a fresh wound. The cold dismissal from the pool committee had been cruel, but it was the unexpected kindness from his neighbor that truly unsettled him. She had stood up for them, a stranger defending a stranger. She had seen a father and a son, not a liability or a problem. He had lived his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His wealth was a gravitational force, pulling in associates, employees, and sycophants. But her gesture had been utterly pure. An act of kindness with no expectation of reward. It was a language he had almost forgotten how to speak. From his window, he could see the warm light spilling from her small house, a beacon in the darkness. He saw the silhouettes of her and her daughter reading a book together. It was a picture of simple, profound love, a universe away from his own silent, cavernous mansion. He had all the resources in the world, yet her life seemed infinitely richer. The next morning, Arthur did not go to his office. He called a series of numbers, his voice low and decisive. He spoke to architects, engineers, and contractors. He described slides, splash pads, and a lazy river. He spoke of waterfalls and gentle, heated currents. He was not just ordering a pool, he was commissioning a world. A world where Leo would never be turned away. A world built not of rules and regulations, but of unrestrained joy. Within days, the quiet serenity of their street was shattered by the roar of machinery. Trucks arrived, digging and shaping the earth in Arthur's vast backyard. Neighbors peered through their curtains, whispering about the eccentric billionaire next door. Clara watched the massive undertaking from her kitchen window with a mixture of awe and concern. She had no idea what he was building, only that it was vast and disruptive. One afternoon, as she was watering her small garden, she saw him standing by the fence, watching the construction. He looked tired, the confident man from the office tower replaced by a father weighed down by a heavy burden. She walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "That's quite a project," she said, her voice gentle. Arthur turned, startled. He had been lost in thought. "Hello," he said, his tone more formal than he intended. "I apologize for the noise." "It's no trouble," she replied. She hesitated, then added, "I wanted to say. I was sorry about what happened at the pool. It was awful." He finally met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw past the reserved exterior to the deep well of pain in his eyes. "Thank you," he said, the words carrying a weight far beyond their simple meaning. "For what you did. For what you said." "I just did what was right," she said softly. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the chasm between their two properties feeling less like a divide and more like a shared space. "What are you building?" she finally asked. A faint smile touched Arthur's lips, the first genuine one she had ever seen. He looked back at the swirling chaos of dirt and concrete. "I'm building a place for my son to swim," he said. He didn't reveal his wealth or his full plan. In that moment, he wasn't a CEO. He was just a dad. "Leo loves the water more than anything. I'm just making him his own lagoon." Clara's heart swelled with an unexpected wave of emotion. It was an act of such extravagant, heartbreaking love. She saw then that the fortress next door was not a cage, but a sanctuary, and this man was not a cold tycoon, but a fiercely protective father. The shared ground of parenthood was more powerful than any fence. As the weeks passed, the chaotic construction site in Arthur's backyard began to transform. A winding river took shape, a gentle mountain of rock emerged, destined to become a waterfall, and the bright, twisting pieces of a waterslide lay on the grass like a sleeping dragon. The project became a source of quiet connection between the two houses. Leo and Lily started their own friendship across the fence. Lily would show Leo her drawings, and Leo, on his better days, would show her his favorite dinosaur toys. Their innocent chatter drifted across the lawn, a sound of pure, uncomplicated happiness that soothed the frayed edges of their parents' hearts. Clara often brought out lemonade for the construction workers, and always offered a glass to Arthur. He would accept, standing awkwardly at first, but soon their conversations became the most natural part of his day. He found himself telling her things he had told no one else, not even his closest advisors. He spoke of Eleanor, of her illness that had come so suddenly, and of the crushing fear of seeing history repeat itself with his son. She loved to swim, Arthur said one afternoon, his voice thick with memory as they watched a crane lower a palm tree into place. She said the water washed everything away, all the worries. I guess I want that for Leo. A place where he can just be a kid, where no one can stare or judge. Clara listened, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm of his grief. She, in turn, shared her own struggles, the loneliness of being a single parent, the constant financial anxiety, her dream of one day opening a small community bookstore. He saw the resilience in her, the unyielding grace with which she navigated her life. She was not broken by her hardships, she was strengthened by them. He began to see the world through her eyes. He noticed the simple beauty in her garden, the way she spoke to Lily with infinite patience, the quiet dignity she carried. The cold, sterile lines of his own existence began to blur, softened by the warmth emanating from her little house. He was dismantling the walls around his heart, one conversation at a time. The day the water park was finished, Arthur felt a thrill of nervous excitement. The pumps hummed to life, the waterfall cascaded over the rocks, and the sun sparkled on the surface of what he had officially named Leo's Lagoon. It was a private paradise, a testament to a father's love. He found Leo watching from the window, his face pressed against the glass, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Is that, for me?" he whispered. "It's all for you, buddy," Arthur said, his voice catching. The first splash was a sound of glorious victory. Leo's laughter, pure and unrestrained, echoed through the yard as he slid down the small waterslide. It was the most beautiful sound Arthur had ever heard. He looked over at the fence. Clara and Lily were watching, their faces lit up with smiles. On impulse, Arthur waved them over. "Come on," he called out. "There's more than enough room." Clara hesitated for only a second before Lily pulled her along. Soon, the four of them were in the water, their laughter mingling. For the first time in years, Arthur felt something other than grief or fear. Watching his son play with his new friend, seeing the genuine joy on Clara's face, he felt a flicker of hope. It felt like the beginning of a thaw, like the first warm day after a long, frozen winter. This lagoon, built from pain and defiance, was becoming something more. It was becoming a place of healing. Their idyllic bubble, however, was fragile. The story of the boy who was banned from the community pool and the father who built him a private water park was too compelling to remain a secret. A local news reporter, tipped off by a gossiping neighbor, wrote a story. At first, it was a heartwarming piece about a father's love. But the internet has a way of twisting things. The reporter dug deeper. Arthur's identity as the CEO of Sterling Enterprises was revealed. The narrative shifted overnight. He was no longer a devoted father, he was an arrogant billionaire who used his immense wealth to flout community rules and spite his neighbors. The story went viral. Headlines screamed from tabloid websites. "Billionaire bully builds watery fortress for sick son, the 1% solution, can't swim in our pool? I'll build my own." Mrs. Gable was quoted extensively, painting Arthur as an entitled menace and Leo as a prop in his father's game of ego. Worst of all, they turned on Clara. A paparazzi photographer snapped a picture of her and Lily laughing with Arthur in the lagoon. The caption was venomous: "Librarian hooks billionaire after poolside pity play." She was painted as a cunning gold digger, a schemer who had used her child to latch onto a wealthy, grieving man. Clara's world shattered. Her quiet, unassuming life was torn apart. Cars slowed as they passed her house. Reporters camped out on her lawn, shouting questions whenever she tried to leave for work. Her boss at the library called, suggesting she take some time off until the unwanted attention died down. She felt exposed, violated, and deeply ashamed, even though she had done nothing wrong. The sanctuary Arthur had built for his son had become a public spectacle, and it had dragged her into its harsh, unforgiving spotlight. The warmth and easy connection they had started to build was now tainted by the world's ugly interpretation. She found Arthur by the fence one evening, the place where their friendship had begun. His face was a mask of fury and regret. "Clara, I am so sorry," he began, his voice ragged. "I never wanted this. I will fix it. I'll release a statement, I'll sue." She held up a hand, stopping him. Her eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "You can't fix this, Arthur," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "This is your world. This is what it does. It takes something simple and good and twists it into something ugly." "Don't say that," he pleaded. "What we have, it's real." "Is it?" she asked, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "Or was I just a project for you too? The lonely librarian you could rescue? I didn't even know who you were, not really. You're Arthur Sterling, the CEO. A man who builds water parks in his backyard. I'm Clara Evans. I worry about the price of milk." Her words were a knife in his chest, because he could hear the grain of truth in them. He had protected his identity, not out of malice, but out of a desire to be seen as just a man, just a father. He now saw that this omission felt like a betrayal. "It was never like that," he insisted. "It doesn't matter," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I can't have this in Lily's life. The cameras, the whispers, the lies. She deserves a normal childhood. We can't do this anymore. Your world and my world were never meant to mix." She turned and walked back into her small house, shutting the door behind her. The warm light in her window blinked out, plunging her home into darkness. Arthur stood alone, the joyful sounds of the lagoon now a mocking silence. He had built a fortress to protect his son from the world's cruelty, but in doing so, he had erected a wall between himself and the one person who had made him feel whole again. The cold had returned, icier than ever before. He was back in his glass castle, and he was completely, utterly alone. For days, a desolate silence fell between the two houses. The water in the lagoon remained perfectly still, its surface reflecting a gray, empty sky. Arthur felt the old hollowness return, a familiar ache that was now sharper, more defined. He had tasted connection, real warmth, and its absence was a form of starvation. He watched Clara's house, but she remained withdrawn, a ghost in her own home. He was losing her, and he felt powerless to stop it. But then he looked at Leo. His son, who had blossomed with Lily's friendship, was now quiet and withdrawn again. "Is Lily mad at me?" he asked one afternoon, his small voice breaking Arthur's heart. In that moment, Arthur realized his mistake. He had reacted to the crisis as a CEO, thinking in terms of damage control, lawsuits, and public statements. He had tried to fight the darkness with money and power. But Clara hadn't fallen for a CEO. She had connected with a father. He had to respond as that man, the vulnerable, grieving man she had defended at the pool. He wouldn't hide behind press releases or lawyers. He would face the world with the only weapon that mattered, the truth. He called a press conference. He didn't hold it in the cold, imposing lobby of Sterling Enterprises. He invited the reporters into his own backyard. He stood before them, not in a power suit, but in a simple shirt and trousers. Behind him, Leo's lagoon shimmered, a silent testament to the story he was about to tell. The cameras flashed, a storm of light and judgment. Arthur took a deep breath, ignoring the shouting questions. When he spoke, his voice was not the commanding tone of a boardroom titan. It was the quiet, earnest voice of a father. "My name is Arthur Sterling," he began. "And I am a father. That is the only title that matters here today." He told them everything. He spoke of his late wife, Eleanor, and the promise he had made to her. He described Leo's battle with cancer, his courage, his simple wish to swim. He recounted in painful detail the day at the pool, the humiliation, the casual cruelty that had broken his son's heart. "In that moment," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "my money meant nothing. My position meant nothing. I was just a dad, watching his sick child be told that he didn't belong." Then, his gaze hardened. And in that same moment, a woman, a stranger, spoke up. She didn't know my name or the size of my bank account. She saw a child in pain and a father who was failing to protect him, and she showed us a kindness that has become far too rare in this world. That woman was Clara Evans. He defended her with a fierce, protective passion. The narrative that has been spun about her is a disgusting lie, manufactured by the same casual cruelty we faced that day. She is not a gold digger. She is a kind, honorable woman. A devoted mother who has faced her own struggles with a dignity I can only admire. She offered my son and me her friendship, and we were better for it. If there is any fault here, it is mine alone, for failing to anticipate how my world could poison hers. He then made a final, stunning announcement. "This place," he said, gesturing to the lagoon, "was built out of a father's love and desperation. But from now on, it will stand for something more. Today, I am announcing the formation of the Leo's Lagoon Foundation, endowed with $100 million. Its sole mission will be to build and fund fully accessible, safe, and joyful recreational spaces for immunocompromised children and their families across the country. No child should ever be made to feel ashamed of their illness. No family should ever be turned away." He fell silent. He had laid his heart bare for the world to see, a grand gesture of complete emotional vulnerability. Clara watched the entire press conference on the small television in her living room. With every word he spoke, she felt the walls she had built around her own heart begin to crumble. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't fighting with power. He was fighting with love. He was defending her, protecting her, with the raw, honest truth of his own pain. She saw the man she had first connected with, the father standing by the fence, his eyes full of a quiet sorrow. She didn't hesitate. She walked out her front door, past the stunned reporters, and across the lawn that separated their two worlds. He was still standing by the lagoon when she reached him. Their eyes met. The space between them was filled with unspoken understanding. "Arthur," she breathed, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, his voice raw. "For everything my world brought down on you." "Don't be," she whispered, stepping closer. "You didn't build a wall. You built a bridge." She reached out and took his hand. It was no longer the hand of a CEO or a billionaire. It was just a hand, warm and strong, reaching for hers in the quiet aftermath of the storm. They would face the world together. 1 year later, the world was a different place. The noise had faded, replaced by the gentle hum of a new reality. The Leo's Lagoon Foundation was a resounding success, with new projects breaking ground in 3 different states. The story of Arthur's press conference had shifted the public narrative from one of scandal to one of inspiration. The community pool, under a new board of directors, had issued a public apology and instituted a new, radically inclusive policy, naming it the Leo Initiative. Mrs. Gable had quietly sold her house and moved away. But the biggest change was the one that had taken place across the stretch of lawn between two houses. The fence was still there, but now the gate was always open. Arthur's mansion was no longer a silent, hollow fortress. It was filled with the sound of two children's laughter, the smell of Clara's baking, and the quiet murmur of stories being read aloud in the evening. Clara had never quit her job at the library, but she now also served on the board of the foundation, her practical wisdom and deep sense of community guiding its mission. She had brought life and warmth into Arthur's sterile world, filling his home with books, art, and an abundance of love. He, in turn, had given her the one thing she had never allowed herself to dream of: security. Not just financial, but the deep, unwavering security of being loved and cherished for exactly who she was. On a warm summer evening, they sat by the edge of the lagoon. The setting sun painted the water in hues of gold and rose. Leo, his hair growing back in soft, sunny curls, was officially in remission. He and Lily were on a raft in the middle of the pool, their heads bent together as they whispered secrets, their friendship an unbreakable bond forged in a time of trial. Arthur turned to Clara, his heart full. The emptiness that had defined him for so long was gone, replaced by a feeling so profound he had no name for it. He took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her skin. "A year ago," he said softly, "I built this place out of anger and pain. I wanted to shut the world out." Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the warm sunset. "And now?" "And now," he said, his gaze fixed on her, "I realize I wasn't building a fortress. I was building a home. I was just waiting for my family to arrive." He didn't need a grand gesture. He didn't need a ring or a formal proposal, not yet. Everything was contained in that one look, a quiet promise of a future built together. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they watched their children play, their two separate worlds now seamlessly, beautifully merged into one. The water shimmered, no longer a symbol of rejection or defiance, but a reflection of their new beginning, a quiet lagoon of peace, hope, and unconditional love.